I'm Raina Butler. I'm an intern with NASCA working with the Food, Land Use, and Health Climate Action Team. And the purpose of this team is to create better food cultures and communities, emphasize the interconnectedness between food, health, and community and sustainability, and also to plan projects about reducing climate change effects and to raise awareness as well. For those of you who are new here, NASCA is a local grassroots people-powered movement in Northern Arizona. We seek to bring people together to push for strong climate action in our communities, and we're working to build a grassroots movement to educate and empower all people to take action to fight climate change. So if this interests you and you want to get further involved with NASCA, Jenna, who is NASCA's Coconino organizer, she'll drop the links in the chat that'll take you to the Climate Action Team's webpage, the sign-up sheet, and some of the others will take you to more upcoming events and volunteering opportunities. So yeah, moving on to the main event, our wonderful guest speakers are James Ski and Joyce Ski. Just a little bit about them is that they founded the Native-led educational nonprofit Covenant Pathways and established Spirit Farm on Navajo Nation as a demonstration farm. And it's focused on healing the high desert southwestern soil with the intentional use of microbiology and composting. Their goal is to reclaim traditional farming and spiritual practices to pair them with regenerative methods to achieve resiliency and food sovereignty in the local Navajo and Zuni communities. So I think I'm done talking. So I'm gonna pass this virtual floor over to James and Joyce. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here, everyone.
You're welcome, Raina. Joyce, you want to introduce yourself first?
My name is Joyce. I hail from country, Mennonite-ish background. Came out into New Mexico in right out of college and haven't left ever since. But yeah, so I think the big thing for me is coming out here. I grew up on a growing organic type growing garden, and I come out here and it's so different to grow. And the only way I ever get something to grow is to use compost. And so ever since then, it's I've been sold, and we've just been really doing so much with it and a lot of researching and things. So.
I'm James, full-blooded FBI, full-blooded Indian, full-blooded. My clan is Red Cheek Clan, streak down the side of from my ear to my chin. And then the other clan that my dad's side is, which is you're born of, is Kia'ani. But to tell you the truth, these words, Coconino, Flagstaff, all of those words, Prescott, Chino Valley, different places like that, are all in my vocabulary because I grew up in Williams, Arizona, until high school. And then my dad worked for Santa Fe. He was a supervisor for the Santa Fe Railroad Company for a number of years, which turned into BNSF. Then originally decided to go back to the original lands of our people, just south of Gallup, a place called Wandelwagen, which is a Dutch name from the Dutch missionaries that started that. We started on this journey about 6 years ago. I was doing a lot of managed care organizations. In fact, I was working on United Healthcare in Arizona, developing the connection between health sovereignties with Arizona and looking at how they can rearrange their Medicaid program to meet some of the needs in our native rural areas all across Arizona, as well as working with a lot of the indigenous communities in New Mexico and California. We opened up Oklahoma, helped them kind of open that up. But in this process, I felt like, this, I don't know if you've seen the man in the maze. You work your way all the way to the outskirts and you realize that, this isn't really what you want to do and you don't really feel fulfilled. So both of us, we kind of looked at each other one day about 6 years ago and we said, we got to change. We're unhealthy. We need to step off this treadmill, of corporations. And we were making really good money. So we basically became dirty farmers, dirty hippies. So we started doing a lot of different regenerative. We came across a a soil scientist by the name of Elaine Ingham. And that's what started on our journey to look at the biology in the soil, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then further on, as we progress and migrated, kept migrating to our center, which is really to our hearts, what our heart's desires are. And I think a lot of people are making this journey because of COVID. COVID's really raised the sort of the flat surface on top, inequities, food distributions, disruptions. Now, petrol is on getting affected all eastern side. So we were talking about what do you call it? Not sustainability, but self-sufficiency. Because sustainability to some degree is you're propping up the original that has been working against not only indigenous people, but a lot of us, which are colonized. And that's part of the extractive sort of development and perspective that we're fighting right now. And part of that extraction has been in the agricultural industry. And that's one of the reasons why we're really, really sick. A lot of Americans is said by testing, by science, that our guts are in really bad shape. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's been really a neat journey for us, and it's been a journey of healing for me, coming from a really arrogant religious background. It's how do I reground myself down to where I'm not above things, dominant, controlling things, even the way I plant, but how do I become one of them? And I'm not any better than they are. We just become one of the flow. So that's been a really good, cool journey for me to take.
Yeah, and I think it's all of our journeys. If you really look at it, we are somehow speaking a different language, and I call it dream time or shadow casting. A lot of what shadow casting has to do with is a book called Black Elk Speaks that talks about it. Black Elk was having a hard time because he was getting all these dreams, spiritual dreams, and he couldn't figure out what was going on about the end times, what was going to happen, and so that he went to a lot of medicine men. The medicine men told him, "You need to shadow cast," and so he talked to more of the medicine men what that meant, and what it meant was you need to do ceremonies of those dreams. And so when he started doing that, a lot of stuff started coming together. Part of our perspective on indigenous perspective is really that the shadow is what we live in, this real life right here, what we call reality or physical reality. But the real reality of that object that casts that shadow is the spiritual reality. So much of our journey is towards that spiritual deep perspective, and the shadow is really the ceremonies that we do. And so how that fits into farming and gardening and everything else, we have to develop a relationship with the microbes again in the soil. Part of the problems that we're having nationally is this polarized system, political system, and it has to do with colonization, it has to do with a separation of that spiritual and physical reality. And we're not doing enough ceremonies that reattach us to the earth, to the sky, to the climate. So those relationships are things that I'm approaching a lot of indigenous leaders, spiritual leaders with, is saying, because you stop farming, you detach yourself from that ceremonies and the shadow casting that you need to do. So it's a really deep subject, and one of the things that the reason why we don't really know is because we're dealing with spiritual illiteracy in this country. We're very physically literate in a lot of ways, but we're spiritually illiterate. We don't know how to progress and migrate back to our own center. So those are the things that we incorporate in the farming practices and the things that we do to help people ground themselves, because science in its epistemology disembowels itself from that spiritual reality. So everything is reductionist, it's mechanical, it's looking at things from a unit and marginal measurements rather than having that relationship with those microbes. And so that's really what we stress is We need to understand what those microbes are, because those microbes create the magic in the soil for us to heal, so that the food in our that we eat becomes medicine.
They're also um, they're also very can turn toxins around, even uranium. I mean, and we there's a lot of information on that out there. But also talk about medicines. I mean, we listened to a doctor talk about a time when he was looking at the compounds that the microbes are actually making in soil, and they were so similar to some of their synthetic medicines, cancer medicines. I mean, that's deep, deep technical stuff. I mean, when you think about, so when you begin to understand what all the microbes can do, that's when you can really start reconnecting yourself to them, respecting them, honoring them in a way, and then begin that relationship.
I'll show you a little bit of diagram probably towards the end, but Raina, can you start those slides? Let's see how good she is. Or do you want me to start them?
I will try my best here.
Okay, great. You can check our website. We have a lot of information on there on sacred stones, and that discussion on that relationship with the cosmology, the water, the dirt, the soil. Here we go.
Um, Let me try to present this.
Right.
Okay, how does that work?
Great.
Kind of.
It's kind of a split screen.
There.
Yeah, one more step probably. Okay, so we came on the idea of indigenous regenerative intelligence. It's a kind of a mouthful. Indigenous basically means, how do you make your farm? How do you use products that are local? Um, Even in the composting, what are some of the materials that you're incorporating into the compost? What are you using local materials? And that's really what indigenous means. It also means that you're respecting those microbes that are native to your soil, not trying to bring something outside from Europe or Spain or France, but it's local. It's Flagstaff local. It's Prescott local. It's Cameron local. It's Arizona local. Regenerative means that you're starting with zero. You tormented the soil, you plowed it and tilled it, you've destroyed the soil, the climate. You're starting from zero and starting to regenerate, helping Mother Nature get its balance back. So that regenerative perspective is really, it can move into a lot of areas like regenerative economy, regenerative culture, regenerative agriculture, regenerative composting, those kind of things that really takes dirt and moves it into soil. And the intelligence is using indigenous perspectives. What are some of those indigenous perspectives? What are some of the things that were historical? Because part of what we're exposed to is the colonization, the extraction, the level of taking things and not putting anything back. So the intelligence is how to go beyond that. Now, back in European days, during Francis Bacon's time and Descartes, let me talk a little bit about that. Francis Bacon went after female healers in his time because he wanted to incorporate and start the movement of the industrial movement philosophically. And Descartes moved into that by using the term, I think, therefore I am, which detaches man from nature. And so it compartmentalizes, puts them in units, and it starts becoming a machinery. How we look at our worldview and our lenses, it becomes a machine. So the intelligence is going back past the industrial mindset into the more organic indigenous mindset, and making our past become our future. And that's how we can break down this colonization that has happened to all of us. We're so extractive. In fact, the word Homo sapien means smart human. Now we've become, what is it? Big, big sapien or something like that, which we've created a big footprint everywhere. We've extracted things. So this movement is really about going back. But before we get started into this wonderful stuff, philosophical stuff, indigenous stuff, let's look at microgreens, okay? The next slide is a little area. Both of us got COVID in January, and I just about, can you move it? Yeah, there you go. I just about kicked the bucket. I was in the hospital, and it was this middle tray here at Sweetgrass that my oxygen level was very low. I was in the house. This is right in our house. And I started growing wheatgrass again. And wheatgrass has really a broad spectrum of vitamins and minerals. It's an emulsifier to take toxins out of your body. And it'll also help the blood get the oxygen levels starting to perk up in your blood cells. The left side is, I love sunflower seeds. And there was really a push towards that sunflower. There was something in my body that wanted to heal from it. So for some reason, I just started sprouting microgreening sunflowers in order to heal myself. And that was what my body was craving. And you'll see some on the right side, you'll see some microgreens that I started. It's a mixture. And what microgreens does, you can do it, what do they call it? Can you say it?
Hydroponic.
Hydroponic, yeah, which is not using compost, but using water. So it's everything in that seed that once it gets the minerals from the water, it'll actually explode into new life. And that's where that all that energy that's been stored in this in the seed begins to break open, and that becomes available, nutrient available to our bodies. So that's hypoponically, that's something that is really easy. You can do it in 8 to 10 days. The soil here is very important. I know that a lot of soils that we're buying from Home Depot or other organic, it's full of synthetic fertilizers, which a lot of these seeds are made for nowadays. So one of the things that we try to do is make our own compost, make our own potting soil so that we can grow. We know where the soil is coming from. We can test the soil through the microscope and count the fungi, the bacteria ratio, and all that good stuff.
I think, and if you don't have access to that, my suggestion would be to look for organic soil or compost, or, but also it's the seed is really important too, the source of your seed. So the more organic or localized, maybe you grow your own seeds too, where where they're coming from. That's very important too. There'll be a lot more nutrients and microbes in those seeds.
Here's you'll see a little mixed greens that I have, and we eat this all the time with our eggs, with our salads, everything else. There's a lot of omega-3s in there. There's a lot of vitamin K in there. There's so many wonderful things. And I started this about a week and a half ago, and we've been chomping on it. But you'll notice as you grow them under the lights that I have here, you can use LED lights, but the greener it gets, the little bit more bitter it gets. So what we do is we stick it in the refrigerator so it'll last a little bit longer because it's dark and cold in there. It's really easy to start. Give me a tray behind you there. This one right here. I didn't train her, so she's gonna wander around my room. I get a tray like this, and you can order these on Amazon, but get one that's sturdy because these things will eventually break and they get brittle if you stick them out in the sun. But what I do is I take water first, maybe about 8 ounces of water, and then start putting the potting soil on top. One of the reasons why I do that is so that the soil itself, when the seeds start growing, they don't get the what is that stuff called, the mold on top. When I first started, I would put the soil down and put the seeds down and then water it, and I'd get a lot of mold, and you don't want that. what I do is I put water in, put the soil in so that the water will seep up into the soil and then start soaking the soil. And then I get a spray bottle and spray the seeds on top. And what I do is I get another tray. Give me another tray there. I get another tray and set it right on top with the seeds and soil, and just let it sit like this for a couple of days. You see, I put it right on top there. Right on top, and it has to be in a dark place for it to germinate. And as the seeds push up, that's when you know it's good to put them underneath the lights. But it's really, really easy to do. And these jars that I have, the ones that are showing up in here, this is really neat. It's got a little sort of screen on there. Yeah, you can just unscrew it, and you can get these on Amazon. And you just use a canning jar. By the way, we couldn't find these things for quite a while because when COVID hit. So what you'll do is you can actually set this like that, and it'll breathe. So anything else you want to add? But wheatgrass seeds, fenugreek seeds, peas, legumes, you can sprout just about anything. And it's just in a couple of days. And what you need to do is just find a place in your house, and it's very cost effective, and you'll get the nutrient density out of these seeds. And then if you put compost soil with the seeds in that compost soil, and if it's indigenous soil to your area, what you're doing is you're relating that microbiome in your gut with the soil itself. So there's a relationship that gets started again.
The microgreens are like instant energy. I remember we went hiking down the Grand Canyon. This is like 20 years ago, and we took some sunflower microgreens. So he had started the sunflowers in the soil, and they got like maybe that tall. And we cut them and we bagged them, and we were halfway down the trail, and we were just so tired. Took a break. We ate some, and man, we were ready to go. Had the energy so fast. It was just really neat. The one place that's really good to get some seeds from is True Leaf.
Yep.
It's an online a website, a place that is a really good source.
Another book that's really good is this sprouting book by Anne Wigmore, which is the lady that started the whole wheatgrass back in the 50s and 60s. And this is one of my best books. I've used it. And it's got simple diagrams. It tells you what vitamins are in there, how to sprout them, what kind of seeds can you sprout. It also has recipes in the back. It's a really, really good book. This is the only book that I know I go back to. I just bought a book, but it's very, very technical, and they're talking a lot about the microbiome and things like that, but it tends to run towards a little bit more veganism and vegetarian, which I'm not. I'm not a bad hunter. I'm a good hunter. So next slide. You want to?
Yeah, so we wanted to show this because we wanted to give a little bit of a diagram. What happens when we're eating a lot of foods that have fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, all the sides, suicide, death is what they actually mean. And so it gets into our systems, and there's a one cell lining in our intestines, and it deteriorates that whole one cell lining. And then that's
right here. Yep.
That's how the leaky gut syndrome begins. Now all our foods, whether it's the good vitamins and minerals in the foods or the not so good stuff, it starts leaking into our system. And now we're getting all these Crohn's diseases, gut, leaky gut, everything. But the gut is the first place where any kind of disease starts, so it's so important to keep our guts healthy. And we talk some about if you want to really look at what foods are good, Google the Dirty Dozen and put 2021, and it'll show you the 12 top in order the foods that have the most pesticides on. And then there's also one for the 15 cleanest foods too.
So the one culprit is glyphosate Roundup that compromises that lining inside the gut. And that gut is one cell to the outside world. So what happens is it begins to leak, and it begins to it's really not gluten intolerance that we're dealing with. It's toxicity in our gut that makes us gluten intolerant. So one of the things that I have this and I had it, but I started using a lot of amino acids from there's a physician that's his name is Dr. Bush. If you want to look at, he's got some neat stuff going on. And there's another physician that's using uh, what do you call it? Nutrient foods to help heal the inside of our microbiome. And everything has a microbiome. Microbiome means just the biology that's layered all over us. And what's going on in science and health is that we're disinfecting everything. We're killing not only the bad bacteria, but we're also killing the good bacteria.
So the healing never got really starts from the soil and the microbes in the soil. So if we don't have healthy soil around us, we're not getting those good microbes in our bodies either. But even just walking barefoot on healthy soil, just eating foods from healthy soil, just being out in the sun in the environment around healthy soils is, and you get those microbes and they just become a part of you outside, inside, all over. And that's what really starts the whole healing process.
Can we get the next slide, Raina? So the microgreens provide nutrition, the mature leaves, because it's just breaking open, like I said. And a lot of folks that were on ships in the 15, 14, 1600s didn't have access to vitamin C, so they started using microgreens. So there's a long history of that. A lot of the microgreens are beta carotene loaded. They're a good source of vitamin E. Greens, even if small in size, contains a lot of vitamin K. And that's something that is really not talked about. And that will fight inflammation, which causes down the road cancer. It's really a reaction where glyphosate has caused a lot of the DNA, RNA to misspell itself. And so even kids are now getting cancer. And people are wondering why. It used to be that in the 40s and 50s, kids didn't have cancer. It was older people that would get it. I don't know if you've seen that they test the stool. Used to be 50, now it's gone to 45 to get tested for stool samples. So there's a lot of things happening to us and the kinds of foods that we're eating. And so a lot of microgreens help stabilize the gut if you're having a lot of gut problems like I did. Next slide.
Also, you can go to the next slide. I'll just, they were also really high in omega-3s. And nowadays our diets 50 years ago or more used to be really balanced with omega-6s and 3s. And now they're so high on omega-6s, which are because there are over too many omega-6s. That's what's causing a lot of inflammation and starting all the chronic diseases. But microgreens can help you balance that omega-6 out because they have a lot of omega-3s.
So a lot of indigenous foods, especially with the Navajos, they were a sheep economy when the conquistadors introduced the churro sheep. So at that time, they were moving them from what do they call it? Winter range, summer range, and we had some of the highest grasses because they were doing regenerative practices, and that's one of the things I've been challenging. A lot of regenerative and science is that regenerative has been around for a long time. It's not so much resiliency, because I can beat my pigs and say, I want you to be resilient in your little pen. That's kind of what has happened to indigenous people. We've been put on reservations and we're supposed to be resilient to a system that's really causing a lot of harm, not just culturally, but health-wise. So one thing that we really stress with Native people is go back to eating sheep, go back to eating lamb meat, and have your lamb go out and eat a lot of, because sheep can go to medicinal perennials. They'll go to different plants. They won't eat the whole plant. They'll go to another one another day And then, so what you get is all this diversity. And so that relationship with the ground, the soil, with their saliva, with their poop, with their urine, all that is a cycle of indigeneity. And indigeneity is really just that secular pattern, not extractive pattern, or not putting animals in just pens and then just loading them up with grains, which they're not supposed to eat anyways. And then they get sick, and so they pump them with antibiotics to keep them alive. And then all that stress before they're butchered, and they're on our tables a couple of months later, and all that toxins are within that meat system. So I really stress that, you know, hey, go back to eating, raising your own animals. We have pigs on our farm, we have sheep, chickens. Everything is sort of an indigenous cycle. Even our what do you call it, chicken pen is indigenous, because we actually don't free range the chicken, we tree range the chickens, because that's where chickens came from anyways, from the trees. So
Yeah, and just another thing on microgreens, it takes what, 7 days to grow.
mhm.
So if you don't have the availability to other really good vegetables or over winter, then hey, this is something that's really easy to do, and
Yeah.
it's quick.
Yep. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is pretty good. This is Dr. Johnson's, Dr. David C. Johnson. He started working with us, and we've been building what they call the Johnson Sioux. His wife and him developed this, and it's a composting mechanism that brings a lot of fungi into the compost. So in the Southwest, what we have is heavily bacterial soil, but what we need is fungi. But if you look at this picture, it shows you how through the eons things develop. You got water, bacteria, you got viruses, fungi, um, mitochondria, the first single cell. You see, look at how much time it took. And then it went into like the megafaunas, the buffaloes. We're actually at the very end of that relationship of mass migration with the buffaloes, and how that those grasses related to them. Look at us. It's like a sliver, and yet we've done the most damage to the earth, and now we're looking to Mars to destroy that. I don't know. I just threw that in. Next slide. That's coming. This is a drawing from a friend of ours from Montana. He's been a soil scientist. He retired, but this is a drawing that he sent us when we were started talking about the soil, the relationship to the soil, climate issues, climate solutions, global warming, all that good stuff. So what's happening here is, if you look on the right side, the soil carbon sponge, the microbial sponge, is actually the compost, the charges in the microbes, the different relationship that it has, and it feeds up into the biotic pump, which is the thermal cycle. It's not so much about carbon drawdown. It has to do with the thermal dome that's over us, and it's not allowing all that heating that's taken place, all that stuff that's heating it up, and then creating this kind of sense of a heat dome over us, and then what we have is compacted soil. Rain is ineffective, more floods, runoffs. I was showing this to some of the native people, and he says, "Is that the reservation on the left side?" And then, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the carbon. The best way to get carbon into the soil is by living roots. So the more we have trees, plants, something green that has those living roots, that's how we get carbon. And if you test your soil, send it into a soil lab, the one thing you really want to look for is respiration. The higher respiration means the more microbes you have in that soil. That means that it's carbon is cycling in the soil, just like up top with the oxygen and carbon dioxide in the leaves, it's also taking place down in the roots with those microbes. And that is what's a lot of people don't quite understand what's going on with that carbon. But the more living roots we get in the soil, the more microbes and the more carbon cycling we have, and the healthier soil we get.
So the left side is really what's creating what's happening in Australia is the fires, what's happening in California. That cycle is broken. So it's not, the rains aren't coming, and what we have is just more global warming. But if we have plants, cover crops, if we have trees, that's the transpiration that needs to take place that creates the biotic pump. It lowers the temperature on our soil. We were up in Cameron talking with people, and I said, you cover your soil. It's going to get hot, with mulching, different things. It's like a blanket. So we have to look at the plants as the mouth to the earth. That's what draws things down and releases oxygen for our benefit symbiotically. So in that relationship, there's some things that we have done extractively and allowed overgrazing. We've allowed a lot of carbon emissions going on, which creates the doming effect. We've kind of broken that Mother Nature cycle, and we've become very linear, very extractive. Like I was telling, that big humans footprint that we're making, not just in the soil, but everywhere else. Next slide. This is, you see these bins at the back? This is Carolyn and Rachel. Rachel is getting ready to get her, she's gonna become a medical doctor. And she's really struggling with the medical field because they're not really taking into consideration the biological cosmology that we're talking about. It's very linear, very reductionist. So she was with us for a while, learned from us. And that handful of compost has enough microbe population to equal human population on the earth. So you can just imagine what's happening. And the smell of good soil hits all the endorphins in a person's brain. So there's a lot of people that come to our farm. That's one of the reasons we call it Spirit Farm, is they heal just by smelling the soil, working in the soil, reattaching to the soil, and building that relationship. So we have huge bins that we make, and we have a ratio. I think we sent a copy to Raina on the formula and some things that we gladly share. So next slide. You want to say something about?
Yeah, the paper we sent her to share is on making compost, and it has a lot of that details in there.
This is how I started. It's always good to see how you start. This is this old satellite dish. I call it the cereal bowl. So I put a lot of stuff in there, just different things in there. The carbon is any brown stuff, leaves that are dying. And if you see a leaf or a corn plant or a plant browning and dying in the fall, it's sending a lot of its energy into its roots. And in the roots, and it's almost like pollen, it emits what they call exudates, and it attracts a lot of microbes to that. So what I'm doing is really a reproduction for the biology to increase. So I add this. This is how I used to mix it from the get-go, and people started calling it the cereal bowl. And we can make compost with these bins, not this bin, but the other bins, in about a month and a half.
Yeah, so he would mix it in here, he'd add some water, and then he would take it from there and put it into the compost bins.
Yes.
Next slide.
So this is what I was talking about, the exudates. The fungi is kind of like the, almost like, it extends itself. It can actually communicate between plants. Plants actually can hear grasshoppers chewing on them, and they can tell another plant what's going on. So we've kind of detached ourselves from all that, talking to plants and things like that, because I think we've kind of have become above that, our privileged way have to kind of detaching ourselves. So a lot of metabolites are happening. Some of these are called hyphae, indo and exto, the different fungi. You'll see evergreens, what do you call deciduous trees, that grow really well in the summertime, help the evergreens get the microbe nutrient levels kicking up. And then in the wintertime, it's the evergreens that help the deciduous trees function. So there's a lot of things, good things that are happening that people are starting to acknowledge, recognize, and understand, the different rhizospheres, the different levels, which we call cosmology, indigenous cosmology, the different layers.
Yeah, so all the plants are helping each other out. And when I see all the plants, I'm meaning all the different plant species. Because when you look out in nature, you don't see a row of cottonwood trees, a row of one kind of grass, another row of sagebrush. They're all mixed up together. Yet in our gardens, we see rows. And that is one of the most difficult things to start to decolonize ourselves on in our gardens, is how not to do rows. You may have to do a row because of how you're watering or drip line, but then mix it up. You don't have to do the same thing, because what's happening is the microbiome, both under the soil and on top, though it helps each other. And each plant has its own microbiome. So if you just have one single type of microbiome, that's how you are inviting diseases in, because you just have one plant. You are monocropping. And so diversity of plants whenever you're growing is so important on the microbes. It's like you're not going to just go to McDonald's all the time and eat McDonald's. You want a diversity of food. The plants want a diversity too of microbes and foods that they are eating.
And that's probably one of the reasons why we're so polarized, is because of monocropping. We do it in the soil. The word for humus is humility. One of the things that we're lacking in these days is humility. So in that relationship, we're trying to indigenize our activities, everything we do in planting, how we raise our animals, how we work with the chickens, how we work with the sheep, how we work with the pigs. All this is part of the indigeneity of creating a circle by using the manure into the compost and then having them fed back into the animals. So that's really what Joyce is talking about, is how do you indigenize your whole concept of balancing the biology, balancing Mother Nature, and at the same time, where do you focus your energy on? You don't do the growing, it's Mother Nature that does the growing, but how do you fit into the context of that? Next slide. Wow, it just focuses right into re-indigenizing, decolonizing ourselves and our soil. So in the Southwest, on the Colorado Plateau, we have limited access to water. So we got to create enough fungi, because the fungi holds that storage of water. We also need to have that respiration that Joyce was talking about in our soil, so that it can capture the water and create a habitat for the microbes. We want to maximize soil production. Is not the main reason for growing produce. Indigenous farmers of the past were very concerned primarily about the relationship, how the cycle of Mother Nature had established through eons. And that's what I was talking about, the shadow casting. It involves a lot of indigenous knowledge. You all have indigenous knowledge. You don't know that, being from Europe, you might be the German descent, it might be the Irish, some things that you can almost call back in your DNA through spiritual meditation, or what I call dream time. There are patterns in the cosmology that mimic Mother Nature. And that's the thing we try to do, is what's Mother Nature saying, and how do we practice the patterns on which it rides on, instead of trying to control it, try to put fertilizers in, try to put pesticides in. How do we work with nature? Go ahead.
No, oh, I was just saying, this whole thing about indigenizing, decolonizing the soil and plants, it all is so so strongly connected to climate and healing our climate, healing our environment. And there's a statistic we've been learning about recently. If we would just increase where we live plants by 4%, we would make an impact on changing global warming.
Yep.
And that, to me, that's attainable if you
Yeah.
really think about it.
So we're moving away from just competition and production as the primary goal, but we're looking towards how does nature cooperate, and how do we honor and coexist with the microbes. We want to produce crops not in quantity but in quality. And I tell growers, no matter where you're growing, just that little garden has more nutrient density than what you would buy at the grocery store. And that's been proven over and over through some of the testing that we've done. We're helping Mother Nature regain the balance with our help. Next slide.
And also, I know we talk so much about Mother Nature, but there's also Father Sky is so important, and how those two really work together really well and need to balance each other out.
So if you look on our website, we have what we call sacred stones, because to a lot of people, especially without that spiritual embodiment, they think that stones are not, they're not living. But it's those microbes that break down the stone to make it available for plants. Whereas the chemistry base is you add all this potassium and nitrogen, all this garbage in there, synthetic stuff, to try to control nature. So the principles that we back up into is that, water is sacred. It's Father Sky. It's the relationship of that biotic pump. And then we're also holding soil sacred because it's Mother Earth. It's that relationship, that kinship that we need to reconnect with the microbes. And that's what I tell people, because we're not relational in our social cultural structure, it's because of how we treat the soil. So honoring microbes is one of the things that we try to do on all levels. And honoring them is acknowledging them and making sure that they're well taken care of, whatever foods they need, whether it be carbon or what do you call it, the brown stuff, the nitrogen, the legumes, whatever, we can add that to it.
And understanding what they really can.
The polyculture is maximizing the diversity. And this is what Joyce was talking about, not just, I had this one little girl that's doing backyard farming. She just took a whole handful of seeds and threw it out there. She called it the jungle farm, the jungle garden. And boy, did those roots really help each other out. We also want to mimic nature with animals, and that's part of the regenerative grazing. We do a lot of bale grazing. We move little slots all across our land to revitalize it. What we're dealing with in the Southwest is desertification. A lot of that stuff going on, and we need to go back to how indigenous people adapted to that desertification. So there's some knowledge that's missing in our perspective. Next slide. So these are the core values and the principles that we move back into. And the nutrient cycling, some of the things we talked about is we use corn because Native people love corn. It's the exudates on the bottom roots that benefit and draw the bacteria, the protozoas, the nematodes, the fungi, all that stuff is working together. The blue spots, you see the little popping blue spots. That's been our approach to conventional farming, the colonized farming. It's to add all these chemicals to the soil to make it grow. They've gotten to the point where they've GMO'd the corn to do well in this kind of fertilized synthetic soil. And so one of the things that's happening to a lot of farmers that are dismounting from conventional farming is they'll have 2 or 3 years of really bad crops before they get back into the natural cycle.
Yeah, so instead of adding, synthetic fertilizers like the little blue phosphorus and things down on the bottom, we depend on the microbes, and it's the poop that comes out of them that holds the key, and that is all those minerals and nutrients, and that's what the plant really wants to eat. And the plant prefers by far to eat that natural minerals and nutrients rather than to be fed synthetic stuff. It takes a lot more energy for a plant to try to synthesize that and get it through its system, for its system to use it up if it's something we synthetically we put on.
So that nutrient cycling is all that we do really to be indigenous and to fit into that cycle. Next slide. I think we're coming to an end here. Or is that the last slide? I'm not sure. Okay. So regenerative agriculture, carbon farming, carbon drawdown. It's really putting carbon back into the soil or leaving carbon in the soil. So what plowing does is it releases a lot of that carbon so that the biology can do its work. To view soil as a living environment for microbes to multiply and flourish. You know, it assumes that the farmer, we take soil that is depleted by industrial farming or conventional farming and move towards a dynamic flow of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and then drawing it back down, like I said about the plant being the mouth of the earth, leaving soil in a much better condition through regenerative perspective practices and composting amendments. We've designed pumps that will run through compost, get it out, like Flagstaff water. I know is antibacterial water and all this stuff, and some of the worst water. We've run through these little machines that we built. And I'm telling you, we've created jungles where things aren't supposed to grow.
Yeah, it's amazing what the keys that the compost hold. Not only does it have the microbes in it that you can get into your garden, but it also has a lot of humic and fulvic acids.
Yeah.
And it's those humic and fulvates when you can take the city water, well waters, whatever, and run it through it. It neutralizes chlorine and neutralizes the salts. And it's the salts and the chlorines and things that are really that don't allow our plants to be really healthy.
Because we don't have a lot of organic material on the surface, especially in Arizona and New Mexico, it's running down through these fissures, it's mineralizing. So even though we use well water, we get this crustation going on. So when we run it through this pump, what it does is it neutralizes a lot of mineralization, and it's beautiful what it does. And that's what's happening in Napa Valley in California too, because they've used well water for such a long time that, you know, they're creating whole areas of land that used to be very fertile into salty soil. So next slide, please.
Oh, saw that. That's it.
I think that's the end of our slide. So I guess we can open up to some questions.
Yeah, all right. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. Thank you both so very much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. That was absolutely wonderful. I know I learned a lot, and I know everyone else did as well, so thank you. So yeah, we'll go ahead and open it up for the Q&A session right now. So let me just pull up the questions. Okay, so this one is from Beverly, and she asked, have you ever grown microgreens between paper towels?
No, actually, I'd like to ask a different question, because that one I kind of got figured out. You said you run your water pumps, or do you have a filter that you run water through, or you just use regular water? Because the water is so salt here. It's so, you know, so do you
we use something. Yeah, we use something called a dosing pump, and they use it in the medical field. And so we make a compost extract, because compost extract is so simple to make from compost. You just take a couple handfuls of compost, throw it in your bucket, mix it up. And then we take use a dosing pump that slowly pulls up that extract while the main water is running through our drip lines. It goes through that dosing pump and it takes it out into the drip lines.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been just wonderful.
You're welcome.
All right, the next question is from Sydney, and she asked, where do you get indigenous soil to start growing microgreens?
That's what we do with all our microgreens. There's a difference between hydroponic, which is just water and whatever's left in the seed. But all of our soil is really stuff that we've made compost out of, and then we breaking it down and then we use it in the potting soil.
If you don't have your own good soil or compost, I would say, just buy a really good organic one, but then go get some of your own soil and add to it. And sometimes around your place, you might have like a piece of wood sitting. And if you would turn that wood over, there's some really dark soil there. That is good stuff.
There is a bag of soil called, what is it? Leaping frogs, or what is it's a, look on the package itself. It'll say mycorrhizae. And if it has that, it has a really good way of holding water in the soil itself. What was the name of that?
Something frog on it.
It might be happy frog.
Happy frog. Yeah, that's it. That's a really good soil.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but if anyone else wants to, just unmute themselves or even put it in the chat now is the time to shine. Not seeing anything.
I just want to say that I loved the story of the girl who just threw the seeds out. That's my style of gardening, and I can just picture that.
Yep. So the one thing about Flagstaff and high elevation, because we're at 7,300 feet, the one thing you have to be careful of is tempering the temperature. Meaning make sure you have shade cloth over your crops. Make sure you cover them during the freeze. So what you want to do is you want to have a moderate temperature, and you can when you do that, the plants will respond. It's these extreme temperatures, gets really hot during the day, and it cools off really fast. That's what will really keep your plants from being efficient. And most plants grow at night.
All right,
let me see. I'm trying to think what else with Flagstaff. The other thing is, you guys have so much organic material that's wasted every fall. I go through there. Sometimes I take a trip to Flagstaff and start loading all these leaves from the side of the road.
The bags of
leaves and trash
needles
bags.
Too,
yes.
yeah.
All right, we have another question from the chat. Taylor asked, if I'm using just eggshells and coffee grounds for my worm bin nutrients, what else am I missing?
Other kitchen scraps. You can put any kitchen scraps in there.
Yeah, and that's really the worm castings is a wonderful way to add fungi into your soil.
They bring a whole different diversity of microbes to the soil. So getting a worm farm going, using the dirt from the worms and stuff is just incredible, great for your garden.
That's a really easy, quick way to do composting. I wish we had a whole class around how to build those thermal bins, which heats up and creates, it breaks down the weed seeds and also pathogens. I could show you a whole pile of sheep manure that I pulled out. And Joyce was saying, it's stinking around here, it's because it's starting to do its job, So we have to put them in bins, and we show people how we've designed a bin that can hold water. You don't have to water it so much because of the Southwest. We don't have a well here. We just run everything off the roof, our roofs. We try to sequester as much water as we can. And I think it's been really hard the last 3 years for us, just like you guys. I'm seeing so much dead cedar as you pull off of north towards the Grand Canyon. And that's scary. That's climate change right there.
All right, I see another question. Is it possible to mix fungi into my garden?
If you get soil that has fungi in it, and some of the best places that have fungi are in the forested areas. Like if you go into where there's a lot of trees, you lift over the pine needles or the leaves, you're gonna see all that white stuff, that's fungi.
The pine duff.
Yeah. So that's one way to do that. But
Yeah.
fungi is very fragile too. So, but it might go into a spore or something, but then you create that right environment, it'll get it going again.
And the thing about fungi is having fungi in your soil really develops the hyphae, the environment in which produce can really grow. And there's a different kind of fungi for that produce. And then there's a different kind of fungi for berries, like strawberries, blueberries. All those are related to the Flagstaff area. That fungi is, what do they call it now? Endo and exto. Yeah, ecto and yeah. There's a whole session on that people are looking at now, because you can't use that fungi, the berry fungi, with the produce because it wouldn't function right. So there's a lot of relationship, even growing wheatgrass and rye together. If you're doing regenerative grazing, they'll compete for the same microbial soil. So you have to have a different layer. So the first succession that happens in soil that it's recovering is a lot of thistles, a lot of bullheads or goat heads. The Russian thistles will come out. That's the soil saying, hey, I need help. So there's a lot of bacteria, and that's the first succession of plants that will come up that says that your soil is in bad shape. The second successions are grasses, and then it goes into bushes and the trees, different successions. But if you have grasses that are showing up in your garden, that's saying that you're really your soil is doing well. I'm trying to think the microbiome in your soil. If you got a lot of infestation of insects and bugs, it's saying that there's some deficiency in your soil because it's creating these entry points, and pests know it. By the way, we have lost 70 to 75% of our insects. They're gone. We only have a remnant left because of the pesticides that have been sprayed all across our country.
Yeah, and what the wild plants actually do is the ones that have the deep roots will pull up the minerals from deep within and bring it to the top surface of the soil. And they also try to help balance out some of the minerals, bringing more into balance. And when your soil becomes more balanced, a lot of those weeds will move on. They'll move on.
Yeah.
And so each weed has a specific purpose for what it's really doing.
And those are the most nutritious.
Yeah, they're highly nutritious.
Highly nutritious, more than the annual crops.
I even take some of our wild plants, what people call weeds, and we dehydrate them, and I powder them down and put them into capsules, and making mixtures and things like that, because I know there's tons of nutrients in them.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing any more chat questions or any more, no raised hands. So I think we'll wrap up now. So thank you everyone for joining us, and especially big thanks to our speakers, James and Joyce Skeet. I know I learned a lot, and like everyone else did, definitely. But yeah, NASCA has a ton more events upcoming. So I think Jenna will post that link again once in the chat. They'll bring it to the website with all of our events. And then, yeah, we appreciate your time and engagement. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, James and Joyce.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.